I was walking around the post today after I arrived, and I was thinking about the long-term patterns of German war making and what I intended to say when I gathered with all of you tonight. And darn if I didn't walk by Frederick the Great's looming over me, as I hope he'll kind of be looming over our gathering tonight, at least in spirit. And I mean that not in any kind of funny way, but actually I mean it in an intellectual way, and I hope I'll be able to make that point and convince you, or some of you in the room, about the validity of it by the end of the evening. We don't have maps, and that could be bad. I really don't intend to narrate for you every detail of the German campaigns of 1942, both in the east, that is the Eastern Front and the Soviet Union, the southern sector of that front, and then North Africa. As interesting as that might be, I don't think that's really what I'm called upon to do. If you wish to know more about that, of course, the book Death of the Wehrmacht exists at finer bookstores everywhere, on all its glorious 300 and some pages, and that all the detail anyone I would hope could ever want on that topic will be there. So let me begin by describing what I see as the problem of 1942 facing the Germans as they entered that campaigning year, and then we'll use that as a takeoff point and move on from there. Nearly destroyed in front of Moscow in December 1941. The German Wehrmacht high command, Adolf Hitler, as well as his principal staff officers, and General Franz Halder, the chief of the general staff, would be foremost amongst the group we should name, decided to have another go at it in the summer of 1942. Now, you know, where I started there, already one begins to get into areas of controversy. I grew up reading histories of the 1941 campaign, which said something along the lines of the Germans being stopped in front of Moscow in 1941. Would that they had only been stopped from their own perspective. They were not just brought to a halt, they were then counterattacked and suffered grievous casualties, somewhere along the order of 1 million casualties for an army that had suffered virtually no casualties, or at least minimal casualties, in the first 2 years of the war. Now, you might say that a Wehrmacht, which is already facing enemies who vastly outnumber it, that has just taken 1 million casualties, should begin to start thinking in a more defensive-oriented fashion. But that's not at all what happened in 1942. The plan was to try it again, launching another grand offensive in the east. And this one would be Operation Blue, Unternehmen Blau, to give the German formulation. The huge losses that had been sustained in front of Moscow did cause certain changes to the approach in 1942. And those are losses in both men and materiel. The army was no longer capable of multiple offensives spanning the entire Eastern Front. So there had been, in 1941, Army Group North and Army Group Center and Army Group South, roughly equivalent to Leningrad, Moscow, and Ukraine, from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The entire Eastern Front in flames in the original invasion. The Germans could no longer do that in 1942. They had already to make some very difficult choices about what they intended to do. And what they decided to do was to aim for the southern sector of the front. To paraphrase Clausewitz, rather than target the Soviet Union's political center of gravity, which I suppose would have been another go at Moscow, the Germans decided to aim at the Soviet Union's economy, its richest farmlands, its industrial districts, and its oil fields. We should be very careful about saying an invasion of southern Russia. This isn't southern Russia at all, as a matter of fact. It's Ukraine, as any Ukrainian will be quick to remind you. Now, when I was writing this book, and I was trying to think what I would say about the 1942 campaign, one of the first things you do is see what everyone else has said about it. You read all the books and all the period literature that you can find. And, you know, it is so easy to see Operation Blue as being somehow doomed from the start. And, in fact, many historians have. They sometimes use those very terms, or even if they don't, they very much make that point, that this was an exercise in futility, that something was bound to go wrong and that it was bound to end badly. Now, certainly, there's a case to be made here. The Wehrmacht started in 1942 short of just about everything, or at least everything that counted. There is a smorgasbord of statistics from which to choose if you're the statistically minded type. Perhaps it was the 1 million